In this video, I'm going to show you how to layer up your 3 layers ready for quilting. I've got my 3 layers on my table already. The backing is on the bottom. I have my wadding in the middle. And I have my quilt top on top of the other 2 layers. The first thing I would do is I would put my backing fabric down first. Wrong side facing up, the right side would be facing down. I then put my wadding on top of my backing fabric. I'm using this Warm and Natural wadding. Now your wadding has a right side and a wrong side to it too. The way to find the right side of your wadding is to take a pin, hold the wadding tight and stick a pin into it. This is the wrong side. There's a little bit of resistance to it, but if I do it on the other side, can you see the pin goes through more easily? This is the right side of your wadding, and this is the side you want to be facing up. When you come to quilting this with your sewing machine, your sewing needle will be able to go through this more easily than it will the other side. So make sure that this is the side that faces up when you're layering up your 3 layers. It's quite easy to tell the right side from the wrong side with this Warm and Natural wadding. This is the wrong side and it's dirty looking. It has a lot of scrim still through it. But if you flip it over, you can see this side's nice and clean and this is the right side. So just to refresh, we have the backing fabric on the bottom with the wrong side facing up and the right side facing down. We've then put the wadding on top of the backing fabric, right side facing up, wrong side facing down. So when you're putting your backing fabric and your wadding together, the wrong sides are going to be together, if that makes it easier to remember. And then we'll put the quilt top on top of those 2 layers with the right side facing up. So to start off, you put your hands into the centre of your quilt and you always smooth out from the centre out to the outsides, and you do that all the way around your quilt. That way you're going to work any creases or any little lumps or bumps in your fabric. You're working from the centre out to the edge of your quilt. Once I feel the top piece looks nice and smooth, I'm then going to flip the quilt over so I can see the back side of the quilt. And you work the same way on the back. So you start in the middle and you'll smooth your quilt out to the sides, removing any lumps or bumps, and then you smooth up to the top, down to the bottom. And you keep working in this way until you've smoothed out all your creases. Once the back's nice and smooth, I flip my quilt back over so the quilt top's facing up again. I'll just make sure there's no more lumps or bumps on the front, and then I'll flip it back over to the back another time and smooth out the back. I'm usually flipping it back and forward twice. I'll do the front first, then I'll do the back, front again, I'll flip it over to the back one last time, and there we go. Back over to the front, and it's all looking pretty good, and we're ready to mark the lines for quilting. There are various different ways that you can mark lines on your quilt top so that you have a nice line to follow when you're quilting. One way to do it is to use these friction pens. My friction pen is bright pink. You can use this pen to draw lines onto your quilt, and once you've finished quilting, you just give the quilt top a little iron and these lines will disappear. There's also air erasable pens and water soluble pens that you could use. You could use a chalk pen. Another option is to use the ends of a bar of soap. Sometimes they have a nice sharp edge and you can use them to run along the side of your ruler and mark your quilt. When I'm marking lines onto my quilt top for quilting, I tend to just stick to using my Hera marker. This is my preferred way of doing it. So now I'm going to show you how to mark lines onto this quilt top using my Hera marker and my ruler. Normally when I quilt, I tend to stick to diagonal lines across my quilt. This time I'm going to do a spider's web. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark straight lines through my quilt, up and down the middle, across the centre, and then diagonally across too, and I'll show you how I do that. The first line I'm going to mark is right up through the centre of my quilt. I'm going to go straight through the fourth block in, which is right through the middle where the orange and the purple join. Then I'm going to mark a horizontal line through the centre of the quilt, and I do this in the same way. It runs right in between the orange and the purple strips, and I'll carry on marking from one side to the other. I won't mark a line in between the orange and the purple blocks. I'll just stitch in the ditch when I come to those ones. These lines can be quite hard to see in this light, but when you finish marking and you take your quilt to the sewing machine, they usually show up quite well under your sewing machine light. For my next line, I'm going to mark this at 30 degrees. There is a 30-degree line marked on your ruler, and I'm going to run that 30-degree line down the centre. Then I'll be able to mark with the header marker a line that is 30 degrees from that centre line, just making sure that it meets in the middle. Each quarter of your quilt is 90 degrees, and I want to add another 2 lines into each quarter of my quilt. If I use the 30-degree marking on my ruler, that will evenly distribute 2 more lines in each quarter of my quilt. And marking all these lines on just gives me the start of my spider web. I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to use my 30-degree line in my ruler, and I'm going to run it along the line that I've just drawn. Make sure my ruler's in the middle, and mark that other line. I'm going to repeat those 2 lines around the other 3 quarters of my quilt. Right, now that we have all the lines marked, I'm ready to start pinning the 3 layers together. I'm now going to take my quilting pins and I'm going to tip them onto the centre of my quilt. I always put my quilting pins away open. That way, when I tip them out, they're all open and they're ready to be used. These wee tins that sweeties come in are great for storing your quilting pins in, once you've eaten the sweeties, of course. And then we're going to start pinning. Just like when you were smoothing out all your creases, you always start pinning from the centre of the quilt and work your way out. My quilt has been split into 12 sections, so I'll start in the centre and I'll pin out one section, and then I'll come back to the centre and pin out the next section. When you're pinning the 3 layers together, if you feel there's a bit of resistance, don't force it in. Leave it and use another pin, because you might end up putting a hole into your quilt top. Also, when I put my pins in, I just put the pins in and I leave them open. I don't close them until I've pinned all my quilt, and I check that there's no wrinkles appeared in the back. Then I close all my pins. If you've pinned it all, closed all the pins, and then turn it over and have a look at the back, you can find sometimes that wrinkles have formed, and then you've got to open all the pins again before you can take them out. I'm just going to lean over, have a wee quick look, make sure I've closed all those pins, and then I'm going to have one wee last check on the back, just to make sure I'm always looking good on that side too. No major creases are formed in the back, that's still looking nice and smooth too. And these 3 layers are now ready to take to the sewing machine and start quilting. So here I am at the sewing machine. I have my 50 weight cotton Gutermann thread threaded into my machine. My quilting foot is attached and ready to go. And my machine also has a Schmetz Sharp 80/20 needle, which is a good match for my 50 weight thread. I'm going to take my stitch length up to 3, and I'm going to take my speed down a little too. I don't like to sew too fast as I'm quilting. I'm going to follow the join between the orange and the purple right down through the centre of this first block. And I'm just going to take it nice and slowly till I reach the end of that block. Once I get to the end of that block, you can see on the next block there's a line that I've marked through the centre with my header marker. So I'm going to continue sewing right down the centre of my quilt along that line. And I'm going to carry on sewing in this way until I've sewn right down through the centre of my quilt. When you're sewing down your lines, if you come to a pin and you feel that it's in your way, just take it out and carry on sewing. As you can see, I've stitched my vertical line down the centre and a horizontal line across the middle too, and then I've stitched right through those other lines at 30 degrees. And then I've drawn on some lines to make my spider web, and I've stitched round those too. I've trimmed off the excess pieces of backing fabric in wadding using my ruler and my rotary cutter. Now when I did the spider web ones, I started in the middle, I did the centre one first, and then I worked my way out until those were all done too. And I'm ready now to bind my quilt. This is my binding here. The binding pieces were cut at 2.5 inches high by the width of the fabric, and they've all been stitched together, and then they've been folded in half to make a nice long strip, and we're now ready to go and add this binding to our quilt. But I'll show you that in another video. Happy quilting!